Hi, Kat here for Lightwave Digital. In this video, I want to talk about a little bit how to make something that's really not the most spectacular model in the world look like something that might be usable and even passable for a production shot. This is going to combine just basically some recycling principles from previous videos that I've talked about using volumetric lights, obviously to help sell a little bit of atmosphere in a shot, and what to do when you don't get much out of a turbo squid asset, which this is what we're looking at right now, in terms of maps to try to help it out. First thing we're going to talk about right now is the lights that I have in here. I've got a number of spotlights, and this is actually quite a big shot, 750 frames. We walk into this decommissioned nuclear reactor cooling tower. We look around and we see a monitor in the middle of the shot, and then there's going to be a message that pops up at the end, but somebody else is dealing with that in comp. So my responsibility for this is basically just get this thing more or less set decorated and lit as quickly as possible so that it can be rendered. So I'm going to gauge VPR here. I'm going to talk about what's being done with these lights to help sell the atmosphere in this room. Now, it's intended to be very dark in this piece. We have these two lights plus another spotlight that's overhead. It's not intended to be brightly lit because I am hiding a lot, but from a dramatic standpoint, it's not intended to be that way at all. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is this surface over here. So we're going to hit shift click on the surface with VPR enabled. That'll bring up the surface editor with the surface selected. Now, there wasn't much in the way of textures that came with this model. I was lucky in some cases even to get a normal map other than a color or an albedo map. So we're going to recycle some of these maps. In this case, I've got the color map being recycled to use as a roughness, and with a couple of little tricks such as an inversion, we can plug in some values and get something reasonable out of it. Let's just disconnect, for example, the bump map here, which is really just the color map with its bump turned way down and then fed from blue, which is a vector, into bump on the surface. So we'll disconnect that and see what it looks like. And this bump map alone really helps to sell that it's got some tooth to it or some reality. And we have to be very, very minimal with this, because anything more than just a little bit, it starts to become toothy and kind of chewy. It doesn't look real like it should. Now, part of the reason why it does look a little bit more toothy than maybe some people might like is because of the angle of this light. So we'll talk about this light next. In this particular scene, I decided to render this out in two passes, one for the actual pass that you see right now and one for the volumetric pass. And this is not unusual in my workflow, nor is it unusual in most studios' workflows, because there are benefits to having these types of passes broken out, even though Lightwave has a buffer system that will allow you to split those elements out right from a single render. But let's take a look at the volumetric settings under the render tab, and we'll go and turn them on so you can see just how useful volumetric light is to help sell something in a shot, and again, help cover up what you may not have to sell it as photorealistic, because you've been left with a turbo squid model that only came with like maybe a color map, a normal map, and if you're lucky, maybe a couple of other maps to help you out. In this particular case, this model literally had nothing. It was provided to me with basically a color map and once or twice in some of the surfaces with a normal map. So in this particular case, volumetric light is actually really helping us out here. Now, I am using, as I've discussed before in previous videos in this series, lights with image maps that are applied as a projection type or a projection image. This really, really helps to sell a volumetric effect without actually having to go in to the nodes editor and start fiddling around with trying to do textures or anything like that. Using a cookie, we will get that projection ourselves. So let's go and take the light cookie R1, flip it back there, Looks great. You get these wonderful little splashes based off of the lens. Let's go to Light Cookie 3. I believe this is the one that we're using over on the other side, but they're pointed in slightly different directions. And because we now have in Lightwave 2018 and up a volumetric system that is based in physical reality, rather than the previous system, which was basically just a complete cheat. We've got two areas where we can control the volumetric lighting effect. We can control it directly on the light, and then of course a global amount under volumetric scattering. We turn this off, you'll see it basically just turns the volumetric effect off almost completely. Well, the processing of volumetrics is pretty much off for volumetric atmospherics in this manner, but if you have regular volumetrics enabled, you can do things like VDBs and that sort of thing. So this is the difference basically. So volumetric scattering can really help to tweak things from a global standpoint. Okay, this is a scattering asymmetry of 0, and by dialing this up and just leaving the scattering weight at 100, you can start to see differences in how dominant that volumetric global value becomes, while still maintaining individual control over the volumetric intensity of a light. So let's pump this to 50%. You'll see exactly what I mean. And if necessary, you can go into the nodal editor and start applying textures and other functions to it that will help give it extra life if needed. But this type of approach reduces the necessity to kind of have to go in and dial every single individual light. And while in the old versions of Lightwave previous to 2018, we had a global volumetric intensity, we didn't have a way to kind of tweak it in a bias with the scattering asymmetric value. That's what that value gives us. And of course, the weight of that will also contribute to the look change. So going further into the animation, this is just the doorway. I'm going to put this back to 100%. Let's just jump out to the part where we're actually inside the reactor, and you can see a couple of things at work. One, the scattering asymmetry, which should be at 0.5. That was the amount that I wanted, and that's the amount that I rendered this shot out with. And we can see the spotlights that are in here helping to sell kind of a drama or visual look that this reactor that's decommissioned has some atmosphere in it. And that's simply achieved through the use of these beams or spotlight cookie images. So if I change one of these, they will drastically change the look. So let's change this one to spotlight cookie RL3, and you'll see that particular light change. So it's always good to have a number of these different cookies on hand when you're lighting something like this with volumetrics, so that you can change the look of the lights very quickly without having to go into the nodal editor and start messing around there and trying to do it with procedural textures or something similar. Very, very handy stuff. Now, one other thing, as I was talking about at the beginning with buffers and why we would want to render this out separately, you can see that we've got the volumetric lights in here because they're on. Certain surfaces that are behind the volumetric effect don't seem to clean up as well as they should. Now, this is something that I'm told should improve over the next few versions of Lightwave, but the solution for us always, because we want to control this effect individually rather than have it in comp, we just separate it out anyways. So we don't necessarily want to have it in buffers. So let's just go and take a look at what the actual buffer for that would look like. So go down here and we're going to see a buffer called volumetric light. And when I flip over, we should just see that volumetric light buffer. Now, splitting it out so that I've got one set of renders that's basically just this with all of my objects selected, turning into matte objects, and either constant or surface values for alpha, depending on the needs of the compositor, will actually render faster than trying to render it all in one set of frames with all these different buffers enabled. I like to split out the volumetric effects completely because then that gives me individual control over them, and I don't have this problem with any sparklies that might take place underneath of surfaces or surfaces that are underneath of that volumetric effect. They clean up properly because the AA can see through it effectively, and we don't have those problems. And not only that, it would be just that much easier to manage one pass if somebody decided after the render has gone through, well, we might want to add a couple more lights here, but they don't necessarily need to be volumetric, or we're going to turn a couple of these volumetric lights off or something. That's easier to manage as an individual pass rather than trying to render everything as an all-in-one render all over again, because it's time consuming to do so. And it may not clean up properly in AA. So that's just a little bit of a small kind of deep dive into how volumetric lights can work to help you sell drama in a shot, and the use of light cookies or projection images on a light to help give you those wonderful God streaks or God rays so that you emulate real world atmosphere that might be on a movie set or out in the fog somewhere, and keeping your shot organized and renderable as a two-pass render, one for your lighting and then one for the actual volumetric effect. And it's brilliant because I can just turn it off. This is my render, and then for the volumetric effect to be rendered, go and select everything all here, hit P for properties, pull over our properties. We're going to go to render, matte object, boom, constant value. Change the render output to be volumetric pass, and of course, save it in EXR because that's what I want. And then this would be the actual render pass. Now, this is very, very quick to render. It's not very long. I believe it's about a minute and 25 seconds, but it renders clean, and I don't have any of those problems in comp later trying to get the stuff that was underneath of it to clean up because it's requiring more anti-aliasing or even additional things done to it. Like, I could pump this pass out first while somebody is still texturing an object in the scene. And in fact, we kind of did have to do that on this shot because in this piece, there is a TV screen that's in the back of there that needs to have that message pop up on there. And we didn't know what that message was going to be. So I decided to render these parts out and then just do the last little bit there with that texture on it. And it worked out fine because nothing is moving. The camera isn't moving, the objects aren't moving, so nothing's going to have any misalignment. And it's just an opportunity to get something into render sooner so that it comes off the render farm sooner and into a compositor's hands. All right, that cleaned up very nicely. Minute and 20 seconds. And there's no noise in this whatsoever. Very, very clean render, especially over animation. Looks beautiful. All right, thank you for watching.